I think the one question I get asked more than any other question is, can I move my retailer list over to Klaviyo? I usually scream, no, please don't, just don't do it. Whatever you do, don't be tempted to do it. People always say, why? Okay. Now, when you're selling on the retailers, you'd have a list like MailerLite, MailChimp, ActiveCampaign, ConvertKit, or one of those others, right? And that's for selling on the retailer. So you'd have a link at the back of your book, maybe a lead magnet. Maybe those of you with the website would have a lead magnet form, because authors are always told lead magnet, lead magnet, lead magnet, etc. to the retailers. So what's the purpose of what I will call a retailer list? Well, the point of it is that you get subscribers to it, and then you can send them a newsletter campaign. And also, when people subscribe to your list, they might go on an automation flow where you send them a couple of emails, maybe 3 or 4 or whatever, to keep them engaged and to welcome them to your brand. Now, the thing is, this is nothing like an e-commerce list. And that is the purpose of what I will call your retailer list, like your non-e-commerce list. I'll call it a retailer list just for the sake of ease. Who doesn't like ease? Okay, so what does an e-commerce list such as Klaviyo or Omnisend do? Well, they do a lot more, but they are focused on buying behavior. And I don't think a lot of authors know this. So this is what happens if somebody lands on your store. Let's say they see a book and they think, okay, I'll add it to my cart. And for whatever reason, they don't proceed to checkout. Klaviyo will send them an abandoned cart flow. Now, let's say this person does proceed to check out, but they don't go through with the purchase. Klaviyo will send them an abandoned checkout flow. By the way, it's important not to confuse the two. Now, say this person lands on your site, they look at your product, they go, oh, that's nice, and then they remember they haven't watched something on TV and they leave. For whatever reason, they just look at the product, but they do not buy. Klaviyo will send them a browse abandonment flow. Now, say someone buys something from your store, they will immediately go into a post-purchase flow, sometimes known as a thank you flow. And by the way, if you're not used to Klaviyo, a flow is an automation, a workflow, an automation, something that's sent automatically once you have to set it up, and then it's sent automatically. Now, when someone subscribes, they will go into a thank you flow. Now, you could have this flow going for a year if you wanted. It could send people an email once a week. And then you've got things like birthday flows where someone can get a discount code on their birthday, and there's so much more. And another difference with your normal retailer list that is a non-e-commerce list is that, well, we've all heard of list scrubbing. So we don't want people we're paying for who don't really want to be around anymore, and they're just there for the sake of it. So when you have a normal non-e-commerce retailer list, you might think, oh, I need to scrub my list. Maybe I'll send them an email saying, do you want to stay on my list? Or maybe I'll just kick them off. But whatever you do, you would send that. Now, with Klaviyo or an e-commerce flow, this is all set up automatically. Of course, you have to set it up in the first place, but you would put them into a win-back flow. Now, if they go through that flow and they still don't buy, then at some point they would progress to the sunset flow. And the sunset flow is basically where they buy, or if they don't buy, they're booted off. But it's all automatic. So they enter the sunset flow, which is a few emails designed to get the person to buy, to get them to be a customer or a customer once more. And if all else fails and they proceed through to the end of the flow, the sunset flow, without buying, then they are automatically unsubscribed from your list. And all this happens with minimum effort from you. Now, it is a fair bit of effort to set it up in the first place, but once you do, it actually does run smoothly. So this is the difference. Now, It's highly sophisticated. Klaviyo is highly sophisticated and runs on buying behavior. So if you go to someone who has just browsed, oh, and by the way, this is a common misconception. People often say, what if the person who's just looked at the product, looked at the book, but hasn't bought, how will Klaviyo know who they are because they haven't subscribed? That's a fallacy, because most times Klaviyo will pick them up for various reasons, such as maybe they have subscribed to a shoe store in another country, or maybe they're already logged into Shopify. Klaviyo will pick them up. So you don't need to worry that they're not subscribed. It won't always happen, but the likelihood is high. So you can go to your Klaviyo dashboard and you can find anybody who's looked at your store. If they're there, you can just click on them and you will see their buying behavior. You can see what products they've looked at, which products they've bought, when, and all this information about them, which is fantastic. As I said, Klaviyo is highly, highly, highly sophisticated, can do all sorts of amazing things. Now, within the flows, it focuses on buying behavior, and you can set up triggers in your flow. For example, you could have a post-purchase flow where, say they've bought a bundle of the first 5 books in your series, and say it's a 10-book series. Well, in your post-purchase flow, you could have them set up so that you might offer them a deal on the next 5 books in the series in the process of that flow. Now, say 20% of the people do take up this offer. Well, you wouldn't want to tell them about it again, would you? Because they've bought it. So with Klaviyo, it's super, super easy to, once you know how, to set up a trigger to send people who then do take up that offer will go in one direction and they will receive different emails. And the people who don't buy, maybe you could tell them about it again down the track. So do you see where I'm going with this? It's very sophisticated and it's highly targeted to personalized and individual buying behavior, or even lack of buying behavior. You can set it up until the cows come home. Like, if this happens, then that happens. If this doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. And with all your books in your series, you can keep showing someone something that will suit them. So you won't tell them about a promotion. And I'm not talking about newsletter campaigns yet. I'm just talking about the normal flows. You can keep people going with the flows. And if you look at my video on Facebook, Puzzle Pieces, I'm always saying, when you market to a cold audience, that is somebody who's never heard of you, it's cost of customer acquisition. So even if they don't buy, but they land on your store, most likely Klaviyo will pick them up and you can continue to market to that person. So Klaviyo works hand in hand with Facebook ads for cold audiences. It's highly sophisticated, as I said, and of course you send out your newsletter campaigns as you would to a retailer, but you can obviously, of course, do that with Klaviyo as well. But what I'm getting at here, authors who are used to selling on the retailers have a mindset about what their newsletter, what their email marketing provider can do. And it's a very limited view. Well, their service provider is probably very limited, and that's why it's a limited view. But when you move into e-commerce, Klaviyo is highly, highly sophisticated. It's chalk and cheese. It's, you know how they say you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear? Well, I personally love pigs and I don't want to offend them, but pigs aren't particularly happy with silk. So it's the same thing. So I'm sure you can see by now that an e-commerce email marketing service is nothing like a non-e-commerce email marketing service. They're completely chalk and cheese. They bear no resemblance to each other. Each one does its own thing. You do not mix the two. You keep a separate list for your retailer people and you keep a separate list for your Klaviyo people. Now, people often say to me, as I've said, can I bring my list across? Absolutely, categorically, under no circumstances should you take your retail list across to Klaviyo. You would completely stuff up all your data. It would be a terrible nightmare and a terrible mess. And then people say, I don't want to have 2 lists. Well, I don't want to go to the dentist either, but it happens, doesn't it? You have to do things you don't like in life sometimes, don't you? Have 2 lists. It's a business, you know, put some effort into it, for goodness sake. It would be better to have 1 list, but you can't. That's the end of the story. Have 2 lists. It would be a worse it would be much more effort if you took your non-e-commerce list over to Klaviyo, because they're not buyers, are they? So how is Klaviyo going to know this? And even if you segment them, there are still going to be issues. Also, Klaviyo works on predictive analysis, and you've got this dreadful mess of data here. It's just an absolute nightmare. Like, seriously, I feel stressed even just thinking about someone bringing their retailer list over to Shopify. Gosh. Why would you want to bring non-buyers into a world of buyers? These are non-buyers. They haven't looked at your page. They haven't added to cart. They haven't added to checkout. They haven't purchased. They have absolutely zero to do with your store. So do not bring them across to an e-commerce list, because they are unrelated to e-commerce, completely unrelated. Now, from time to time, you can check your list. You can send out a newsletter to your retailer list and tell them about your store. Some people will come across, some people never will. They want to stick with their Kindles, their Nooks, their Kobos, their whatevers. They won't come across, but some will. So yes, there will be a bit of work looking at them, going into Klaviyo and seeing if there are double people, but just do it for the first couple of days after you send out a newsletter, say 3 days max. It is a bit of work at first, but after the first year, I know you'll probably think, what a year, but after the first year, you won't have many people. It won't be such a chore. But that's the thing. A business does require work. What's the alternative? The alternative is to pay somebody else to do it for you, but the alternative is not. And you can also use a Zap if you wished, but the alternative is not to move your non-e-commerce list over to Klaviyo, because that would be the same as making a beautiful sponge cake and then you went outside and you dug up some mud and put it in the middle. That would make more sense than bringing your retailer list across to Klaviyo. The data would be completely ruined. There'd be no point to anything. You might as well just give up and go home. So I hope that makes some semblance of sense to you. And I hope you can see why you keep the two of them apart. You do not want them to merge. What's that they say about oil and water? You don't put them together. And this is what Klaviyo and non-e-commerce lists are like. You must keep them apart. They do different things. Sure enough, you send out a campaign, but with Klaviyo, you send out a campaign based on their buying behavior. And with, say, your retailer list, you don't know if they've bought. Now, say you're looking at your open and click rates on your retailer list and you say, oh gosh, this person's only bought once, this person's only clicked once every 5 emails. And this person's opened every single email and clicked every single email. So obviously, who wouldn't think that person was the better prospect? But what if that person is just curious and clicks every email and thinks, oh, well, that's interesting. She's done that. I'm not going to buy it, but oh, that's interesting. And what about the person who clicks every 5 times, religiously buys every 5 newsletters you send out, but you'd never know it? And that's because it's a guessing game. You do not know what these people on your retailer list are doing. And you can't tell by opening and clicking behavior, because as I said, some might buy every time they click and some might click but never buy. And so it's misleading. I did something interesting a while back. I sent out a newsletter to my retailer list and said, please reply with the word free if you're only on my list to get free books and you have absolutely no intention of ever buying. And I had several hundred replies saying they only wanted free and they had no intention of buying. Of course, I got them off my list. But isn't that interesting? And I had no way of knowing that. And often these were the people who would be quite chatty when I sent out a retailer newsletter and came back to me and said, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now, I've had so many book bubs over the years that probably that's how they got onto my list, you know, with 99-cent books, etc. on the book bubs. So I might have done a few free book bubs back in the day. I think I did back in 2016 or something. But anyway, that's how they must have been on my list. And some of them had been on my list a long time, and some of them did have good open rates. And some of them said, I am definitely never going to buy a book. not those exact words, but they were very strong. I will never pay for a book. I thought, okay, that's good for you, but I'm not paying for you. Goodbye. I didn't say that, of course. I just deleted the subscriber. But see, that's interesting. What I'm trying to say here is that you do not know with your retailer list. It's a guessing game. You can make educated guesses. They're probably going to be wrong. I'm just saying that to be polite. But you really don't. Let's be frank. You don't have a snowballs. You don't have a clue. You're guessing, because the click and the open rates. So yes, we all know the open rates can be a bit funny, but we know if someone's clicked. Now, it's misleading because, as I said, somebody could click on every single email, but they might never buy a thing. Some of those people who said they would only get free books had very high click rates, and I was quite surprised. And I did repeat that newsletter as well several times, and I was surprised by the behaviour. Like, they had good good click rates, but they said they would never buy a book. And I haven't been in KU for many years, a few years anyway. I left it in, I think, 2015 mid-year, but I might have gone back into it a bit. But long story short, I had and also I must tell you, this was on my scrub list. Like, I am a vicious list scrubber. I think it's sort of a hobby. I get really absolutely vicious. If someone looks sideways, I'll scrub them off my list. And this was a very, very highly scrubbed list, which I had, before I sent out this email, I had got down to, I think, 20% of what the list had been. And that was already, and that's a third of what it was. So I got it down to a third, and then I got it down again. And then I sent out this email over the course of a few months. And so you don't, and it's not just me. It's common sense. You do not know. You do not know who is buying unless they tell you. And you don't know because you don't have customers. When they're on the retailers have the business. They're not your customers. When they're on Klaviyo, they are your customers, and you know for a fact what they've bought. And Klaviyo will tell you how much money you've made from each campaign. When you send out a newsletter, it will say you've made X amount from this campaign. It will tell you how much money you make each month in your various flows, abandoned cart, birthday flows, all these flows. It will tell you exactly. And you can do special post-purchase flows for different books, for different series. You can really get into the nitty-gritties, and you get really deep data, really deep analytics with Klaviyo. You don't get anything with a normal retailer list. And while I'm on the subject, don't listen, really. A lot of these retailer lists will say, oh, yes, we can integrate with Shopify. I don't want to say anything impolite, but I would just say I myself would be extremely wary of what these things can do. They are usually extremely convoluted, extremely difficult, and they don't have anywhere near the sophistication that Klaviyo has, because these other lists were not developed for e-commerce. And they say, oh, e-commerce is big now. I'm going to make it fit this square peg in a round hole, and I am going to try to be good for e-commerce. But let's face it, they're not. They don't have the snowballs. They're not. Klaviyo is set up only for e-commerce. That is what it is set up for. It is highly sophisticated, and it can do absolutely incredible things. It will make you money. Keep your retailer list away from Klaviyo. Don't let the two meet. It's just like when you see those soap operas on TV and someone's entertaining a guy, and then she's thinking, oh no, there's a knock on the door and it's another boyfriend, so she puts one out the back door. That's what you've got to be like with Klaviyo and your retailer list. You can't have them meet, or it will be a disaster. Keep them away from each other.